It was late afternoon when I walked into Dave's office, expecting to find the usual chaos. Papers stacked in neat piles, his laptop open with multiple tabs of work-related documents, and the lingering scent of his favorite coffee. He'd been working late the last few weeks, staying in the office long after I'd already finished dinner with the kids. At first, I chalked it up to his demanding job, but that day, something felt different. I hadn't intended to go through his things. In fact, I rarely ever did. Trust was something we built our marriage on. But when I noticed his desk drawers slightly ajar, a fleeting curiosity took hold. Dave was always so organized, always had his life together in a way that made me proud of him. Still, as I moved closer, I felt an unusual tightness in my chest. Maybe it was the long hours and the emotional distance that had started creeping into our lives. I opened the top drawer, the one closest to me, and began sifting through his paperwork. It was mostly invoices, client lists, and the occasional half-finished project he'd been working on. But then, tucked behind a manila folder marked meetings was an envelope, simple, white, and sealed. My fingers paused. The envelope looked out of place, not like the usual work documents he kept in his office. I pulled it out, the corners slightly bent as I held it between my fingers. As I carefully broke the seal, a surge of unease rushed through me. Inside were 2 airline tickets, both for New York City, for a flight next week. The departure dates and times were clear, but it wasn't just any flight. There were 2 tickets, not one. I stared at the tickets, blinking, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. One ticket had Dave's name on it, the other was for someone else. My heart skipped a beat as I ran my finger along the second name, which was unfamiliar to me. Who was this person? Why was Dave going to New York with someone else? The ticket was for a one-way flight, which only deepened my confusion. I scanned the tickets over and over, hoping that the name would somehow make sense. Maybe it was a colleague, maybe this was part of some last-minute business trip. But the more I thought about it, the more my stomach twisted. Dave was always careful about his travel plans. We never had any secrets when it came to business. He would have told me if he was taking a trip like this. I set the tickets down on the desk, the paper crinkling under my touch. My mind was spinning, and the familiar warmth that I usually associated with my husband's office seemed to fade, replaced by something cold and unsettling. I sat in his chair, looking around the room as if searching for clues. His favorite coffee mug sat next to the papers, untouched, as if he'd just left. It felt like a stranger's space, not the sanctuary I'd always considered his office to be. I exhaled slowly, trying to gather my thoughts. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. But what if I wasn't? What if my husband, my partner for over 2 decades, was hiding something from me? I had to know more. But where would I even start? My mind raced through possible scenarios. Could it be a business trip? After all, was there another explanation? I looked back at the tickets, running my fingers along the smooth edges, trying to figure out what to do next. There had to be an explanation. I told myself that over and over, but the nagging feeling in my gut only grew stronger. I stood up, pacing the small office, trying to calm myself down. I had always trusted Dave, perhaps too much. He was the man I had married, the man I had raised children with. He was the one who had promised me forever, the one who had been my rock. How could he be doing this? How could he betray me, without even a word? But then, my thoughts returned to the second ticket, the name. Who was this person? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was missing, some hidden truth that I needed to uncover. I walked to the window, looking out at the sunset, trying to steady my breath. My reflection in the glass looked like someone else, someone who was beginning to question everything they thought they knew about their life. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. Confront Dave right then and there. Wait until he came home. But if I was wrong, if I misunderstood, how would I ever take it back? The tickets sat in front of me, silent and damning. I didn't want to be paranoid, but something told me that what I'd just found was just the tip of the iceberg. And so, I made a decision. I would confront him, but I had to be sure. I couldn't just walk in, accusations on my tongue, without knowing the full truth. I grabbed my purse and the envelope, slipping the tickets into my bag. I needed to think, I needed to plan, and somehow, I needed to find out who the hell was going to New York with my husband. The days following my discovery felt like I was trapped in some kind of suspended animation. I hadn't said a word to Dave yet. Instead, I spent my time replaying the moment I found those tickets, over and over in my mind. His office was always his space, his refuge. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed some line by snooping around. But who was this mystery person, and why were they accompanying him to New York? I tried to keep everything normal when he came home. I greeted him at the door, kissed him on the cheek, and asked about his day as though everything was fine. He seemed distracted, his mind elsewhere. But then again, he always did after long days at the office. He offered a weak smile and mumbled something about being tired. But I noticed the small things. His usual openness was gone, replaced by something that looked like avoidance. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart was pounding. He hesitated, just for a moment. "Yeah, just a lot going on." His eyes shifted to the side, not meeting mine. That was the first crack. It wasn't like Dave to be vague with me. He usually told me everything, his thoughts, his struggles, the ups and downs of work. But now, he seemed to be pulling away, retreating into himself, and I couldn't ignore it. For the next few days, the tension between us grew. I watched him more closely than I ever had before, noticing the little things that seemed off, the extra time he spent on his phone, his late-night work calls, the way he would jump when I walked into the room. It was subtle, but undeniable. It felt like he was hiding something from me, and I wasn't sure if I could take much more of the secrecy. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from him anytime soon. So, I decided to dig deeper. I started with the tickets. I knew the name on the second one. It was a woman's name, Carla Fisher. I ran the name through Google, but came up with nothing concrete. That made my stomach churn even more. No social media profiles, no obvious connection to him, just a name that led to a dead end. That night, I sat at the kitchen table. My laptop opened in front of me, but I couldn't focus on anything else. My mind was too wrapped up in the thought of what I might find if I looked harder. I needed to know who Carla Fisher was, and if she was more than just some random business contact. I was starting to feel like a detective, piecing together clues that didn't seem to make sense, but I couldn't stop myself. My life had always been so predictable. I married Dave because I trusted him. I had built my life around him. But now, everything felt like it was collapsing around me. The next morning, I woke up early. Dave was still asleep, his back turned to me. I slipped out of bed quietly and grabbed my phone, thinking I could get a little more digging done before he woke up. But as I checked my messages, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. A message sent late the night before. "Can't wait for our trip next week. I've already booked the hotel. See you soon, love." I froze. My fingers shook as I stared at the message. Love, was this how far things had gone? Was this the woman Dave was seeing? I didn't know for sure, but the more I read the message, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a business trip. I felt sick. I had suspected something was off. But this was a clear sign that there was more going on than I had ever imagined. Dave had been lying to me. The worst part, he hadn't even had the decency to hide it properly. I quickly locked my phone and shoved it back into my pocket. I didn't want to wake Dave up yet. I wasn't ready for the confrontation, but the weight of that message pressed heavily on me, and I knew I couldn't wait forever. Later that day, I tried to carry on as if nothing was wrong, but I could barely focus. The tickets, the message, Dave's strange behavior, everything felt like it was closing in on me. I felt more and more like a stranger in my own home. That afternoon, Dave invited me to lunch at a local cafe, something we used to do when we were younger, when things felt simpler. I wasn't sure if he was trying to act normal, or if he genuinely wanted to spend time with me, but I couldn't stop my mind from racing. Was he planning on telling me what I had already discovered? Or was he just buying time? I didn't want to confront him there. Not in a public place where it would be harder to control the situation. But I couldn't stand the silence anymore. Something had to break. When we sat down across from each other at the cafe. He was unusually chatty, talking about work as though nothing had changed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was doing it to keep my mind off of what was really going on. I leaned in, my voice steady but my hands trembling. "Dave, I found something. 2 tickets to New York. For next week." And I found a text message. His face went pale. He stopped mid-sentence, his fork hovering over his plate. For a long moment, he didn't speak. "What's going on, Dave?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who's Carla Fisher?" His eyes shifted, avoiding mine. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. And in that silence, I knew everything had changed. The silence between us hung heavy in the air, thick enough to feel suffocating. Dave stared at me, his face pale and strained. I had never seen him like this before. His eyes darted around the cafe, avoiding mine as if he was searching for an escape. I wasn't about to let him off the hook. "Dave, don't you dare look away," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I'm not going to sit here and pretend I don't know what's going on anymore." He took a long breath, but his hands were shaking slightly as he set down his fork. For a moment, I thought he might tell me everything, confess the truth, but instead, he did what he always did when faced with confrontation. He deflected. "It's not what you think," he muttered, looking down at his plate. "You don't understand, Jane." I leaned in, keeping my voice low but unwavering. "Then explain it to me, Dave. Explain the tickets, the text message, and the woman I don't even know. Tell me what I'm missing here." He rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated, but still reluctant to meet my gaze. The fact that he wasn't denying anything was telling. But I wasn't about to let him spin this any longer. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered, as if the words barely escaped him. "Then stop hurting me by lying," I shot back. "Who is she, Dave?" He swallowed hard, then finally looked me in the eyes. The guilt was written all over his face. "Her name's Carla Fisher. She's someone I've been seeing for a few months now." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure whether to feel betrayed or relieved that he was finally telling me the truth. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, and I fought to keep my composure. "I never meant for it to go this far," Dave continued, his voice cracking. "It started as something small, just a mistake, but it's grown, and I couldn't find a way to stop it. I should have told you sooner, but I couldn't bear to see the hurt in your eyes." I sat back in my chair, my hands clenched into fists under the table. The shock of it all hit me in waves, and it was hard to process what he was saying. My mind flashed back to all the years we had spent together, raising our children, building a life. How had it come to this? "I trusted you, Dave," I whispered, my voice shaking despite myself. "I gave you everything." "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and I hate myself for what I've done, but I can't go back and change it." The words stung like a slap across my face, and I fought the urge to break down in that moment. I wanted to yell at him, to demand more answers, but I felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion instead. I didn't have the energy for his guilt, his apologies. "Not yet. Do you love her?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Dave hesitated, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just the fear of getting caught, but something deeper, something that made him squirm in his seat. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "I don't know if it's love or just something else. But I'm here with you, Jane. I'm still here. I'm not leaving you." The audacity of his words took me by surprise. He thought I would just accept this, that I would sweep it under the rug, let him continue living two lives. "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to have both." The anger that had been bubbling under the surface finally spilled over, and I couldn't keep it in anymore. "You're not leaving me, but you're leaving us. You're leaving the life we built together." "And for what, Dave? A mistake? A few months with her?" His eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't care. My heart was in pieces, and no amount of remorse could put it back together. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but the words felt hollow. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I couldn't sit there anymore. I couldn't listen to him. Not right now. I had to get away, to process everything that had just been thrown at me. "You're sorry," I said, my voice shaking. "Well, sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't fix what you've done. You're going to New York with her. Do you even understand how that makes me feel?" I turned and walked out of the cafe without another word, my head spinning, my heart shattered. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to escape, to put some distance between myself and him. I needed time to think, to figure out what I was going to do next. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of Dave and Carla, the tickets to New York, the hotel booking, the text message. It all replayed in my mind like a broken record. But amidst the chaos of my thoughts, one thing became clear. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. There had to be a way to take control of my own life again. And somehow, I was going to make sure that he would face the consequences of his actions. The next few days felt like they were slipping through my fingers, each hour more uncertain than the last. I had tried to get some clarity, to find a way to process what Dave had told me, but the anger and betrayal were suffocating, and every conversation we had felt like it was leading nowhere. He was still apologizing, still saying the same empty things, that he was sorry, that he regretted what he'd done, and that he wanted to make it work. but none of it meant anything anymore. I had spent the last few days obsessively searching for more information about Carla Fisher. I had to know who this woman was. And what I found only made things worse. Carla wasn't just some woman Dave had met. She wasn't a random fling or a mistake. Carla Fisher was a woman with a connection to Dave that went much deeper than I ever could have anticipated. I found her LinkedIn profile first. She was listed as an associate at the same company where Dave had worked for the past 10 years. But the more I dug, the clearer it became that her role was far more important than I had first thought. She was an executive, a key player in a department that worked directly with clients Dave had been handling for years. Carla had been part of Dave's professional world for a long time, but there was more. I dug deeper into her social media profiles and uncovered something even more unsettling. Carla had been in contact with Dave's colleagues who I knew, who I trusted, and who had known me for years. There were photos, messages, and even work events where Dave and Carla had appeared together, just the two of them, as if their relationship had been something everyone else knew about except me. My stomach twisted as I realized the extent of Dave's betrayal. Not only had he been lying to me, but he had been hiding it from everyone around us. I had been living in a house of cards, thinking everything was fine, when in reality, everyone had been aware of what was going on. The weight of the truth was suffocating, but even then, I couldn't bring myself to confront him again. Not yet. That was until I received an unexpected invitation. Dave had invited me to a work event, an annual gala for his company, a tradition that had been going on for years. It was something I usually enjoyed, a chance to see his colleagues and make small talk. But this year, the thought of it filled me with dread. I wasn't sure if I could stand being in the same room with Dave and pretend everything was normal, but I didn't want to back out. Not yet. Not without knowing how far this affair had gone. When I arrived at the venue, the atmosphere was different. Everyone seemed to be on edge, and Dave was unusually distant. I tried to talk to him, but he was distracted, keeping his distance even more than usual. I could tell something was off. And then, during the awards ceremony, it happened. The company's CEO, a man who had always been cordial with me, took the stage to announce the Employee of the Year award. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, Dave wasn't even nominated. But when the name was called, I felt my heart stop in my chest. Carla Fisher, the CEO announced, his voice booming through the speakers. I froze. My eyes immediately searched the crowd, and I saw Carla standing in the front row, a bright smile on her face as she walked up to accept the award. And standing right beside her, his arm around her waist, was Dave. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. The whole room erupted in applause, but all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. Dave's arm around her waist, the way he looked at her. It wasn't just an affair. It was something more, something public. I could barely contain my emotions as I stood there, stunned. The tears that had been building up for days threatened to spill over, but I forced myself to stay composed. I had to. I couldn't let anyone see how much this hurt. Not here. Not now. I watched them together, their chemistry undeniable. I knew, in that moment, that everything Dave had said about wanting to make it work had been a lie. If he cared about me at all, he wouldn't have been flaunting his relationship with Carla in front of the people we both knew. But the worst part, he didn't even seem to notice me standing there. The applause faded, and I was left with the sharp sting of reality. This wasn't just a private betrayal anymore. This was something public, and it hurt more than I could ever put into words. I walked out of the venue, my legs shaky beneath me. I didn't even know where I was going, but I needed to leave. I needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere, the smiles, the whispers, the stares. It was too much. And as I walked into the cold night air, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. Not anymore. I spent the next few days in a daze, replaying the moments at the gala over and over in my mind. The way Dave had looked at Carla, his arm casually draped around her waist, so natural, so comfortable. It was everything I had feared but never allowed myself to believe. He wasn't just having an affair. This wasn't a fling or a moment of weakness. He was in love with her, and it had been going on for months, right under my nose. I couldn't shake the feeling of being completely alone in this. I had trusted him with everything, given him the best years of my life. And now it felt like it was all crashing down in front of me. But there was a strange, distant part of me that knew I couldn't give up just yet. There had to be something more, something I could use to take control of this situation, to make sure I didn't lose everything. But even as I thought that, the reality of it set in. I had no idea what that something was. The isolation was the hardest part. I found myself pulling away from friends and family. What could I tell them? I couldn't bring myself to explain the situation, to let everyone in on the betrayal that had shattered my world. I didn't want their pity. And the idea of facing the questions that would come after they found out about Dave, that terrified me more than anything. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I began researching Carla more, trying to find some kind of leverage, something that would give me an upper hand. I discovered that she had recently bought a new apartment in the city, just a few blocks away from Dave's office. That seemed like a trivial detail, but it only added to the feeling that this affair wasn't something temporary. I also started going through our financial records. If Dave had been hiding this relationship for months, how far had it gone? Had he been spending money on her? Did she have access to our accounts? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table, opening the most recent bank statements. I scanned through them, looking for anything unusual. And that's when I found a withdrawal from our joint account. It was small, only a few $100s, but it had a note attached. Dinner with Carla, Manhattan. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Dinner in Manhattan, the same city she had bought an apartment in. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but it wasn't just the financial detail that made me anxious. It was the fact that Dave hadn't told me about this. He hadn't mentioned the dinner, the trips, any of it. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. He was so deep into this lie, into this affair, that I didn't even know where to start. I felt like I was chasing shadows, and every time I thought I was getting closer to the truth, the ground slipped out from under me. The worst part was that I had no one to talk to. I couldn't turn to Dave. I couldn't turn to my friends. It was just me, facing this storm alone. I had always prided myself on being strong, on handling things on my own. But this was something I couldn't fix alone. I spent the next few days trying to gather my thoughts, trying to figure out what to do next. I had to confront Dave again, but I wasn't sure if I was ready. My anger was simmering beneath the surface, and I didn't want to do something I would regret. But the longer I waited, the worse it got. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted him, asking him to meet me after work. He agreed immediately, and I knew this would be it, the conversation that would change everything. When we met, it was almost like the air between us had thickened. We didn't speak at first. We just stood there, facing each other. It was as if both of us were trying to figure out how to start. Dave, I said, my voice quiet but steady, I've been thinking. I've been looking through the bank statements, and I found the withdrawal for dinner in Manhattan. I also found more tickets for trips to places I didn't even know about. What's going on? His eyes flickered with guilt, but instead of coming clean, he shook his head. Jane, I don't know what you think you've found, but I'm not hiding anything from you. I took a deep breath, keeping my composure. Don't lie to me anymore, Dave. You're not just hiding this affair. You're hiding everything. You're pretending to be one person at home and someone completely different when you're not with me. And I've had enough. He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. I needed to say what I had been holding in for days. You've been lying to me, Dave, and I can't keep pretending that everything's okay. You're with her, not me. You've made your choice. He looked at me, his face a mixture of frustration and shame. Please, Jane, I never wanted to hurt you. Then why did you? I snapped, my anger finally breaking through. Why did you choose to hurt me, Dave? Why did you choose her? His eyes dropped to the ground, and for a moment, I thought he might finally break. But then, just as quickly as the moment had come, it passed. He stepped back, his face hardening. I don't want this to be the end of us, he said, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. I'm asking you to give me another chance to try and work this out. But I couldn't. I couldn't forgive him for what he had done. Not yet. Not when everything I had trusted was gone. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I whispered. For days after our confrontation, I felt like I was walking through a fog. The emotional weight of it all was unbearable. Dave's apologies were nothing more than words I couldn't listen to anymore. Every time I saw him, I was reminded of the man who had betrayed me, who had turned everything I knew upside down. Yet, as much as I wanted to leave him, to walk away and never look back, something in me wouldn't let go. Perhaps it was the remnants of the woman I once was, the one who had believed in love, in loyalty. Or maybe it was the part of me that still thought there had to be something worth saving. I spent a week in turmoil. I avoided Dave, avoided friends, and kept to myself. But even in the silence, I knew that I couldn't let the situation stay this way. I had to take control of it. I needed to make sure that Devon Carla faced the consequences of their actions. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I finally saw an opportunity. It came to me in the most unexpected of places. My father's old desk. My dad had passed away 2 years ago, and since then, I'd avoided going through his things. The old oak desk sat untouched in the corner of the room, a silent relic of his life. But one day, when I was cleaning the house, I decided to open it up. It wasn't that I thought I would find anything of great importance. I just needed something to do, something to distract myself from the mess my life had become. I pulled open the drawer and began rifling through papers, old receipts, and letters. Most of it was junk. But then I found something, a small, tattered envelope with my name on it. I didn't recognize the handwriting, and the envelope was sealed shut. For a moment, I hesitated. It felt intrusive, like I was violating something sacred. But curiosity won out. Inside, I found a legal document. The paper was old, yellowed with age, but still legible. It was a trust agreement, signed by my father years before I was born. At first glance, it didn't seem relevant, but the more I read, the more I realized just how important it was. The document outlined the inheritance my father had left for me, but there was one clause that caught my attention. In the event of a divorce or separation from a spouse, the entirety of the inheritance shall be reassigned to the individual named in this agreement, subject to a final decision made by the beneficiary. My breath caught in my throat. This was it, the key to everything. I read the document again, every word sinking in. The inheritance wasn't something I had thought about in years. My father had left me a considerable amount of money, enough to set me up for life. But I'd never paid attention to the fine print, the clause that would trigger a change in the distribution of the inheritance. I had been so focused on the emotional betrayal of Dave and the destruction of my family that I hadn't even considered how much was at stake financially. But now, I had leverage. I called my lawyer the next morning. She was stunned when I explained the situation and read the clause to her. "You're telling me that if you divorce, that inheritance could be yours entirely?" she asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "Yes," I replied, feeling a new sense of clarity. "But there's more. I need to make sure Carla doesn't get a cent of that money. If Dave's affair has led to this point, he needs to understand that his actions have consequences." My lawyer hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You're in a strong position, Jane. We can push for a swift divorce, but we need to gather more information about Dave's finances. If we can prove he's been mismanaging his personal accounts or has been hiding assets, we'll have an even stronger case." The idea of using the inheritance as leverage felt strange at first, almost cold, but then I remembered how Dave had betrayed me, how he had flaunted his affair with Carla so publicly. He needed to understand that his actions had consequences, not just emotionally, but financially as well. Over the next few weeks, I began the slow process of gathering the information I needed. I accessed our joint accounts, with the help of my lawyer, and started combing through the financial records. What I uncovered was more than just unsettling, it was damning. Dave had been siphoning off money from our accounts for months, sending large sums to unknown entities and making unexplainable withdrawals. He had been covering up his affair, but he had also been hiding his financial activities. My suspicions had been right. There was far more to this than just a simple affair. I didn't need to confront him yet, not until I had everything in place. But with every piece of evidence I uncovered, I felt the tide turning. I wasn't powerless anymore. I wasn't just a victim of betrayal. I was taking control of my future. The next step was going to be the hardest. I would have to bring it all to light. I would have to show Davin, everyone else, the full extent of his actions. But when the time came, I would be ready. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm I had been bracing myself for, but never quite ready to face. The court papers were filed. The evidence was in place. I had gathered the financial records, the proof of Dave's affair, and the trust clause that would change everything. It wasn't just about ending our marriage anymore. It was about making sure that Dave understood the full weight of his betrayal. The courtroom was sterile, its white walls reflecting the weight of my anxiety. The small, cold space felt like a world of its own, and in a way, there would be no more pretending, no more dodging the truth. This was the reckoning. As I sat at the plaintiff's table, my lawyer beside me, I couldn't help but think of everything that had led up to this moment. The tickets to New York, the dinners in Manhattan, the constant lies. I had once stood at the altar, pledging my life to Dave, believing that we would grow old together. Now, Here I was, sitting across from him in a courtroom, seeking justice. Dave sat with his attorney, his face a mask of frustration and guilt. I couldn't look at him directly, not without the anger bubbling up inside me. The last few months had shown me a side of him I never wanted to see. But today, I wasn't here for him. I was here for me. The judge, a stern woman in her mid-40s, called the court to order. The room grew quiet, and I could hear the low hum of tension in the air. She asked both of our lawyers to present their opening statements. Dave's attorney went first, defending his client, trying to paint him as a man who had made a mistake but was otherwise a good husband and father. I knew exactly what he was doing, trying to minimize Dave's actions, to make it seem like this was just a lapse in judgment. But I wasn't going to let that happen. When my lawyer spoke, I could feel the strength in her voice. She laid out the evidence meticulously, beginning with the financial mismanagement Dave had engaged in over the past several months. She presented the bank statements showing large sums of money being funneled into accounts I didn't know about, the dinners in Manhattan, the trips he had taken with Carla. Then, she introduced the trust clause, how Dave's affair, how his actions had triggered a massive financial change in the distribution of my father's inheritance. I could see Dave's face falter as the details were laid out. He didn't have an explanation for the money. He didn't have a justification for his lies. The room was quiet, except for the sound of papers rustling, as my lawyer presented the final piece, the proof of the affair, the emails between Dave and Carla, and the text messages where Dave made promises he had never kept to me. It wasn't just the affair anymore. It was everything: the lies, the hidden finances, the betrayal of trust. This was no longer just a personal matter between husband and wife. It was about justice. It was about showing Dave that his actions had consequences, both personal and legal. When it was Dave's turn to speak, I could see the cracks in his composure. He started by apologizing, again, and tried to explain that he never meant to hurt me. But his words were hollow. They didn't carry the weight of truth anymore. I made a mistake, he said, his voice wavering. It was a lapse in judgment, a moment of weakness. I never intended for it to go this far. I wanted to laugh at how pathetic that sounded. A moment of weakness. He hadn't just made a mistake, he had deliberately betrayed me, over and over, and had done everything he could to cover it up. My lawyer stood up, and for the first time, I felt a surge of confidence. Your Honor, she began, we are here today because the actions of the defendant, Mr. Dave Carter, have not only caused immense emotional harm to my client, Mrs. Jane Carter, but also significant financial damage. Mr. Carter's actions have breached the trust of his family, undermined his obligations, and based on the documents provided, have triggered a clause that completely alters the financial standing of this divorce. The judge nodded, looking at Dave with a stern expression. Mr. Carter, you understand the weight of these proceedings, correct? Dave didn't respond immediately. He looked at me, then back at the judge. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. His voice had no conviction in it, and for the first time in months, I realized that he had nothing left to say. The truth had come out, and he had no way to hide from it. The judge deliberated briefly, and then spoke again, her voice calm but firm. Based on the evidence presented, the court will be granting Mrs. Carter a full financial settlement, including the inheritance that Mr. Carter had attempted to circumvent. The affair, while personal, has certainly impacted this case's outcome, and Mr. Carter will also be responsible for paying damages to his wife for the emotional distress caused by his actions. The words hit me like a tidal wave, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Dave had lost. He had lost the money, the trust, and the one person who had once believed in him. It wasn't over yet, but this was the turning point. This was where it all came crashing down for him. I was no longer the woman who stood by, waiting for him to come back. I was the woman who had fought back. The judge banged her gavel, and the room emptied out, leaving me standing there, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Outside, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the last few months slowly lift off my shoulders. I wasn't sure where I would go from here. But I knew one thing for sure. I had taken control in the weeks following the hearing. I found myself in a quiet kind of limbo. The immediate chaos had settled down, but the emotions, the betrayal, the anger, the weight of what had happened linked. The financial settlement was finalized quickly, and Dave's share of the inheritance, the part he thought he could take from me, was rightfully mine again. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. I had taken something far more valuable, my dignity, and that was priceless. I moved out of the house we had shared for years, Dave's lawyer had tried to get me to stay, to negotiate for a better living arrangement for the kids. But I couldn't stay there. I couldn't look at the walls that had once felt like home, only to now remind me of every lie, every betrayal. I found a small, charming townhouse in the suburbs. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, and it was a place where I could start again. The first few days were strange. The kids adjusted quickly, mostly because they didn't fully understand the depth of what had happened. I hadn't told them the details only, that their father and I were going through some changes, that things would be different but they would be okay. They didn't ask many questions, and for now, that was enough. I spent the days settling in, getting to know the town, meeting a few new neighbors who seemed kind and welcoming. It wasn't just about finding a new place to live. It was about finding a new life, one where I wasn't defined by the woman who had been betrayed, the woman who had been lied to. I had been so caught up in trying to save my marriage that I had forgotten who I was before Dave, before all of this. The change didn't happen overnight. It took time, but with every step I took, whether it was a new job I had applied for, or a new hobby I tried just to see if I could rediscover myself, I felt a little more whole. I wasn't healing as quickly as I'd hoped, but I was healing. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was walking in someone else's shadow. As for Dave, well, his life seemed to unravel in its own way. The affair with Carla fizzled out as quickly as it had started. She was gone, no longer the secret I had feared for so long. In the end, I wasn't surprised. What had started as a stolen moment of excitement had turned into a burden for both of them. Dave had lost everything: me, the kids, the financial stability we had built. The truth of his actions had turned his life into something unrecognizable. But I didn't pity him, not anymore. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. I had finally realized that my worth was never tied to his actions. It was mine alone. It was a crisp, autumn day when I received the final piece of paperwork, a formal document outlining the divorce settlement. It was done. The last chapter of our story was closed, and I was free. Free from the lies, free from the weight of betrayal, free to live my life the way I saw fit. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the papers in front of me. The moment was oddly anticlimactic. There was no fanfare, no great sense of victory. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about peace. I had peace now, and that was enough. The next week, I took a trip to the beach, a small coastal town that I had always wanted to visit but never had the chance. I walked along the shore, the cool wind brushing against my face, feeling the weight of the world lift just a little bit more with every step. I thought about the woman I had been when I married Dave, the young woman who had believed in forever, in promises made at the altar. And I thought about the woman I had become, the woman who had survived the storm, who had faced betrayal head-on, and refused to let it destroy her. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was mine, and it was enough. When I returned home, I found a letter waiting for me, an old one, postmarked from a few weeks ago. It was from my lawyer, updating me on the final settlement and informing me of a clause in Dave's financial arrangements that had been overlooked. My lawyer had uncovered evidence that Dave had been attempting to hide additional assets, funds he had hoped to keep from me. But, because of the divorce proceedings, everything was now being traced back to him. The thought of it didn't fill me with anger anymore. Instead, it made me feel indifferent. He had his chance. He had his choice. And now it was time to move on, for both of us. The letter was a formality, an extra step in a process that had already been decided. And with that, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The game was over. I had played my part. Now it was time to live. As the months passed, I continued to rebuild. I found work that I loved, something that made me feel fulfilled and excited again. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with during the years of my marriage. And I even began dating again, slowly, cautiously, because I knew now that I deserved better. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, a glass of wine in hand, I reflected on how far I had come. I had gone from being a woman torn apart by betrayal to someone who had reclaimed her life. Dave had thought he could break me, that he could destroy everything I held dear. But what he didn't understand was that I was stronger than he could ever imagine. I wasn't the same woman I had been before, but I was finally, completely, whole again. Authors note this story isn't just about betrayal and revenge, it's about reclaiming control and finding strength in the aftermath of heartbreak. Jane's journey is one of self-discovery, where she learns that justice doesn't always come in loud confrontations or grand gestures, but But sometimes in the quiet moments where we take back our lives piece by piece, the karmic resolution lies not in the dramatic end of Dave's actions but in Jane's ability to rebuild, rise from the ashes of her pain, and find peace on her own terms. What I wanted to emphasize through this tale is that no matter how deep the betrayal or how overwhelming the hurt, we all have the capacity to move forward, to heal, and to emerge stronger than before. Justice may not always be swift or public, but it's always possible, and often, the most powerful form of justice is simply letting go and forging a new path.